I think that understanding is a good foundation. From there, it really is about, then calling each other out and having those difficult conversations. You'll have things that, oh, it's just a joke, it's not that serious, something that you hear all the time. Oh, it's just banter. I hate that word. But something that we say at SARSAS is like, what you permit is what you promote.
Hello and welcome to Series 2 of the Bristol Girls Can podcast. Today we're talking about all things women's safety. My name's Heather and I'm joined by Jade from SARSAS, Courtney from Empire Fighting Chance and Katie from Bristol Women's Voice. So, women's safety, what does safety mean to you?
I think it's psychological and it's also physical. It's the ability to move around and not be fearful that you might come under attack. It's also the ability to show up to sporting events and realise you're not going to be coming under threat of harassment or abuse or unequal treatment when you're taking up space at sporting events is part of it, I think.
I think it's that lack of fear, isn't it? Often as a woman, when you're exercising, particularly in public, there's that element of fear and that element of restricting yourself, of thinking, oh, I can't do that because of X, Y, and Z. Someone might say something, someone might judge me, someone might harass me. So just being able to, think, I want to do this, and having the freedom to actually do it.
Yeah, I think it's sort of differentiating, which is that not feeling safe and that little bit of nerves. Say, for example, turning up to a new class, I think it's natural for everyone to feel that little bit nervous, but after a couple of weeks, if you still don't feel safe in that environment, or if you're feeling judged, I think that's a different thing, and that's a cultural issue within the setting that you're in then, or you're going into, rather than just that one-off nerves.
And obviously, we're all working in Bristol and working with women. So, in particular, what does safety look like for women in Bristol?
Go again. I think safety for women is, well, we know that women. But it's being safe, and it's also feeling safe, as we just mentioned. I think there's recent research out from the Girl Guides last year that talked about how 86% of young women aren't going out after dark or restricting their movements after dark. And then there's the increased cost of things like taxis and trying to get to and from places for reasons of safety. So we know this is a very, very real experience. So I think it's freedom from being harassed. It's knowing that you're going to get from A to B safely. Nothing's going to happen on the way. You're not going to come under attack. But also that you can travel from A to B, or take part in the nighttime economy, take part in sports in the daytime, wherever that is, free from harassment, free from assault, but also that you feel that you're not going to come under threat from those things. So you can take up and enjoy the full experience of, say, the sport or the activity or whatever it is that you're doing, knowing that you're not going to come under attack.
Yeah, I think also, like times of the year. I think, of course, I love Bristol, growing up in Bristol, and I like to think that it's a almost safe city. But in the daytime, in the summer, is great. I think everybody's out, but I think again, it's. I think particularly in the gym that we're in Easton, and sort of the thought of some of the young women and girls that come to our gym, I know we see attendance drop when it comes to those winter months, when some of the roads are not lit as safely as they should be, and like the underpasses as well that go through Easton. I know that it's not safe for them, or it doesn't feel safe even for myself, let alone young women and girls. So sort of encouraging and get that education out to like walk in pairs or threes if you can. So yeah, I think there's a lot more we can do environmentally with the environments that these young women and girls are walking through, and also like educational pieces on how to keep safe, but not for only young women and girls, but some of our young boys and men as well.
Mm-hmm. And transport's a big issue for them, that as well.
Absolutely.
Buses in particular, again, being quite a gendered issue. Women use buses more. And making sure there's safe environments on there, and there is kind of connectivity that gets you to and from places on time, that allows you to plan your journey effectively to reduce your waiting time, and also that the bus companies are then taking action to support safety on the buses and other forms of transport, of course, as well. No.
I agree.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, interestingly, thinking about times of year, as we know, when it gets darker and colder, often women are more restricted because of that fear of going out whilst it's dark. But whilst I was doing some research ahead of this podcast, actually, I also found a study that said, I can't remember who it was from, but they were saying that women also feel more fearful in summer months because you might be out in summer clothes, for example, often get more sexualized, more objectified because of wearing summer clothes. So it's also all year round, I suppose, women are facing, but maybe facing different forms of harm or different types of harassment. But sadly, it is also an all year round issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to bring up, because a lot of the discussions, like when we start talking about violence against women and girls again, is normally in the winter. So obviously, we've got this Girl Can campaign around Let's Lift the Curfew, and that's to highlight the fact that women are less likely to be physically active because it's colder and it's darker and they don't feel as safe. But then if the buses aren't safe or taxis aren't safe, like how can they active travel as well? And that's going to be an all year round issue, like you say, with the clothing and things like that. And I think that brings on to sort of the next question around that, like women's safety, like it's not just physical, it's psychological. Like how do you think this affects the behaviours?
I think it's, can I also add, I think it's important in across the country, but also in Bristol now, looking at the wider context of increased hostility, particularly against global majority people in general, but of course women are disproportionately targeted within that, particularly headscarf wearing women. And I think we've seen the horrific marches and kind of movements in anti-immigration sentiment, and I think there's a real intersectional impact of that as well. And it's just kind of to recognize that, which then impacts across people's freedom of movement across the city.
Thinking about like harm as well, it's absolutely not just about the physical harm, it's also that psychological harm. It's a huge weight on your shoulders, isn't it, every day to be walking around that constant anxiety of and constantly having to risk assess and constantly feeling psychologically unsafe. I don't know if this is 100% relevant, but I used to work for a domestic abuse service, and I initially did one-to-one support with victim survivors of domestic abuse. And so often they would say to me, the psychological, the emotional abuse for them was the hardest part, because it can be so insidious compared to maybe the physical abuse. And that's not to minimize at all people's experiences of physical harm, but it's to recognize that psychological harm is massively impactful. Or yet often discourse really does focus on physical harm.
There's a whole bunch of extra emotional and mental labour that people that are more vulnerable, particularly girls and women, are doing every time they want to leave the house or take up sport or do, just engage in sort of civic life, particularly in the winter, but then also in the summer, and also just in different contexts, in different ways, I think. It's like a whole layer of thinking and safety planning and labour that women are doing, that it creates barriers then, of course, to engaging in sport or engaging in community, really.
And would you have these conversations with your friends, like about feeling safe or times you're feeling safe? Or
Yeah, I definitely do. Like probably since I was a teenager, having conversations about like where to go. I'm from quite a small town, but that has areas that aren't safe, and it's always like, don't go for a run there at night. And then even in Bristol's the same, like when I first moved here, don't go there at night. I don't go here. And I think that's a big mental load, like that psychological effect of being like, I want to go out for a run, but it's still dark at like 6 o'clock in the morning. I don't know, obviously, about you two, like how you feel about that.
Yeah, I've been training for a 10K actually, because I'm doing like a sponsored run for my work, and it's actually really impacted my training because it's been dark, and in the evenings, if I can't go for a run on a weekend, then I'm like, I can't actually get a run in, so maybe I have to do it on the treadmill at the gym, but then it's lower impact, so that doesn't actually help me prepare as well. So then it has actual like physical impacts for the run itself. So yeah, huge knock-on effects.
Yeah, and I think in terms of phoning, checking in,
Yeah.
letting people know where you're going, and those kind of conversations, or meeting people halfway if you're going to go out in the evening, or some of those things, whilst also fighting to be as independent, to take up room in public as much as possible, because all these things kind of crowd people out of public space.
Yeah.
Who are you creating public space for, and who's entitled to then take up space? And so there's a real kind of feministy about taking up space, particularly doing what you want when you want, obviously being mindful to safety, but not being frightened out of doing so. But of course that requires the planning and the conversation. So I think there's a balance. You don't want to take unnecessary risk, but also I think some of these things over time have been used to control women's behaviours, and so I think it's important to kind of challenge that and push back against that as well.
Okay.
And how, obviously, I know, Courtney, you work with young girls, teenage girls, but like for everyone, how early do you think these feelings, I guess, are taught to girls and women, or we feel them? Like, how early on do you think that happens?
I think from sort of my experiences of sports coaching and PE teaching in primary schools since I was in my early 20s, I think seeing a lot of girls feel conscious about themselves and about their bodies and not wanting to do PE actually, or get, and I don't know if it's any different now, but I know in primary schools there was almost like, not forced, but they changed in the same room. There was no separate changing facilities for boys and girls when I was doing the sports coaching in primary school. So I think, again, you're a lot more aware of your body, of who's around, who's looking. I think with things on social media and some stuff that younger and younger boys are taking in, some of the horrific misogynistic things that boys are taking in, and I think young people are being a lot more or speaking a lot more in a sexual nature younger, which is horrendous. So we see it a lot, and doing a lot more within the boxing gym for young women and girls to feel empowered and to feel confident about their bodies. But from what my experiences are, seeing that younger and younger and trying to have those conversations, and are they actually aware, and can they talk about things, what they're experiencing, without feeling that shame, and who can they talk to about those experiences too?
I saw one study that said that around 30% of young girls start to experience harassment between the ages of, I think it was 11 and 13, and then 5% was even younger than that. So it can be under the age of 11 for around 5%, potentially more, of girls. So it starts very, very young.
Definitely. I think when we're growing up, there's always conversations with your parents, isn't it? Always being like, oh, like, be careful of this, like, don't speak to strangers, stuff like that. And I feel like those conversations happened with me probably a lot earlier than maybe like my friends that were guys and stuff. And then I think you go through phases where like you're a teenager and you're like big and strong and like nothing's ever going to harm you, so like you're not as scared. And then like you kind of go into your early 20s and then you're like, oh no, like now I'm going back to being a bit scared again and a bit more careful. But I agree, like with you, Courtney, like when I was working with young people, it's a lot earlier now, like they're having these conversations, and I think it's that social media and that having an effect on it. Definitely. Within your work, obviously you work with a variety of different people. Do you see any differences between sort of like age and race and disability with maybe how women or girls like perceive their safety or like manage these barriers, or even what barriers they have?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got to think about the way society is structured, right? We live in a structurally unequal and inequitable society, and certain groups of people are given less power than others in society, and sadly that's why we do see so much intersectional harm. And sadly, you know, girls or people who do belong to marginalised groups, whether that be because of the colour of their skin, where they were born, their religion, their socioeconomic background, whether or not they have a disability, and of course many other things, sadly they do face higher rates of harassment, of harm, because usually people who cause harm want power and control over the other person, and then so they target groups of people who have less power in society. So sadly, yes, we do see higher rates, but we also have to think about how the sports are often kind of made for and designed for certain types of people. So you have, for example, black girls who worry about their hair being protected during sports, or people who wear headscarves or body coverings being excluded from sports because of regulations and rules around what they have to wear. And usually for women and girls, it's very small outfits. So we absolutely do see people being excluded from sports dependent on their characteristics.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo that. I think women from more marginalised groups do face and have experiences of, higher levels of harassment, which I think, it sort of feeds through into additional safety planning, and it's all probably the same types of things, but just to a more intense degree. I'd suggest. Up until some of and again coming back to the sort of riots and the wider context. The kind of protests and counter protests, coming back to within the context of that, a lot of the Muslim women that we were working with, particularly those that had children, just weren't leaving the house, particularly if they had more than one child, because they felt they couldn't escape as easily. But again, that's kind of that's racism and kind of how that intersects with misogyny and sexism as well. So I think it's important to recognise the people that even aren't leaving the house, to be able to kind of share their experiences of the safety work that they're doing, and how that's like a really real experience for a lot of women across Bristol at the moment. And again, previously we've done work with disabled women and campaigned for the reopening of public toilets. And again, that being a real key barrier after COVID, when they didn't open up again, and they closed for budget reasons. And we're delighted to hear that actually the council more recently have committed to spending money to reopen them again, but for many years they were closed, and that really leading on to disabled women, older women, people not leaving the house because they know that they weren't going to be able to access public toilets. And again, that's kind of a slightly different thing from safety, but it's definitely relevant in terms of who we're creating public space for, and who we're encouraging and accommodating in those spaces.
Yeah, I think it's also important to highlight as well that when there isn't public toilets, when there is unsafe spaces outside, that when people restrict themselves to the home, that's also maybe not a safe space for them. So in regards to like DV, things like that. So particularly when COVID hit, a lot of women actually were like, well, I can't go outside now and be safe because my home isn't the safe space. And obviously, when we're creating these safe spaces, like what role do you think community, like sports spaces in particular, play in creating these safe environments?
Yeah, I think I can speak for what our sort of ethos and our culture is like at the boxing gym, and I think it stems right back to sort of the late 60s, early 70s, where I think it was one of the first places that black people and white people mixed. We've got on our wall Lisa Perryman, who represented England boxing as well at some championships. So going right back to that sort of cultural shift that everybody's welcome if you sort of in that space to improve your life, and you're almost the outcast if you don't go along with that ethos and that culture, and having that culture of calling people out. I think, a couple of things that I love about the gym is seeing like when we're doing our mentoring sessions for young people who are coming through our program, is not just having young women come through the program, they're paired with female coaches, or young boys being paired with male coaches. It's sort of mixing it up and going against that grain, and seeing our young female coaches coming through who've been through the program and now coaches themselves, and then taking on a class full of young boys and feeling comfortable within that space and actually owning that space and having those conversations. One of the things that we've done recently is created a box sisterhood sort of program. So there's a group of young women not only focusing on the boxing, but having conversations around sort of their periods, their bodies, and what it's like, and safety as well. And I think a lot of them admitted that's the first time actually that they've been allowed that space to open up and talk about their feelings and talk about sort of their periods and stuff like that, because they wouldn't have that conversations with men, with their friends, sorry. So yeah, that it is built from sort of the very beginning, I think, and the foundations, and what environment you are creating to enable everybody to feel connected. One of the things we do as well on a Saturday is created a group for women of Muslim faith. So they'll train on a Saturday as a group, and we actually got them sort of the ones sort of mainstays of that group, who are leaders in that group. We actually got their boxing coaching qualifications, so then that empowers them to take the sessions by themselves. We board up the windows so they don't have to compromise their faith. They can take off their hijabs and feel comfortable in that space, and nobody goes into that space until the session's done. So yeah, it's creating those environments and being aware and having those conversations of, am I creating barriers to anybody accessing the gym by doing this? How can we remove those barriers in a safe way that doesn't compromise anyone?
I think that's a really powerful example. I think it's sports centres and other kind of community spaces. It requires really deliberate intentionality around that. I think so often people will provide a space and be like, it's open for everyone can come, everyone is welcome. It's like, what have you actually done to make sure it genuinely is welcome? It's sort of that, bell hooks thing about building from the margins to the centre. If you consider the needs of all of the people that are marginalised, minoritized, and what they would need to come, then you'll create a space that's inclusive. If you sort of say, oh, it's open for everyone can come, and then you're working from the centre out, it will never be inclusive. But it requires, caring about it. Do you know what sexist microaggressions look like? How are you going to challenge it? Are you confident in doing so? Will you have the backup of your organisation in that? Do you know what racism looks like? Do you know what, LGBT hate, all the isms, like, what are you doing to create a space that is deliberately mixed? So actually, and then sort of testing that and being really strong and clear and coherent across the team on your values. And I think it's fantastic to hear the work that's going on there. And I think that's the role I think sports venues and others can take, but it requires investment, diversity of thought, and then commitment to that through training and blocking out time and bordering up windows. I think that's just a really fantastic example.
No, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? There's a difference between putting it all over social media or on your boards that everybody's welcome, and then there's drilling down to the fact, what does that mean?
Yes.
And recognizing actually there are some people who are going to be you're going to have to section off, and they have their own space. They're still part of the gym, but they need their own space, whether it be faith or whether it be anything. So we also had the LGBTQIA+ group as well. So, and that's the space, that's their space. It doesn't compromise anybody else in the gym, but that is the space that they feel most comfortable. How can we do it that way? So it's actually just, that difference between saying it and actually doing it, and recognizing that we don't know all the answers and we're learning. I'd like to say, I'd like to sort of admit myself that I'm an ally, but also I don't know everything. So coming on here is great to learn about what it feels like actually in different spaces and how you feel marginalized sometimes. So educating yourself daily.
And working with the people for whom you're trying to create
absolutely,
space, How would you possibly be an expert in all of these things?
Yeah.
And us. We thought, we looked up how to do it, so we're going to do this. Is that one?
Yeah.
Talk to the people that have physical disabilities that want to come and use a physical space. What do they need? And I think it's telling them as well. You have to kind of remember that, to take disability as an example, the world isn't created for it to be disabled access. And so you can say, this space is open for everyone. But people, who are physically impaired may, they won't know that. They'll just assume it's like the rest of the world. So it's like, have you told them? Have you sort of said, no, these are the adaptations we've made based on the things that you told us. This is, we have made this space inclusive for you. Come work with us. Come be here. And I think it's, again, to your point around just putting it across social media. Have you gone to the Muslim Women's Group and said, these are the steps we've taken?
Yeah, and I think that's it. We want you to use the gym. We want you to feel invited and safe. And how can we best do that from your own experiences? I think, and not being scared to have those conversations. I think, although a lot of people, we do want to do the right thing and the most positive thing to make everybody feel safe, but I think we're scared to almost have some of those conversations at risk of maybe we feel from our own sort of judgment or whatever that we feel that we might insult somebody by asking, but no, it's actually with the best intentions.
So again, that kind of, sorry, I'll stop talking. Speaks a bit about, not being afraid to get it wrong. And I think there's something around the way in which conversations are held at the moment, particularly across social media, you're really quite slammed if you kind of put a wrong foot. I did just use physical impairments, and I'm aware that that's not the most positive language. So kind of just recognizing that that's not great on my part either. But yeah, we're kind of living in a place that's far more out to get you if you get it wrong, which then I think kind of makes people more risk averse and a bit more afraid of getting it wrong. And if you're afraid of getting it wrong, you're not going to take a risk, and you're not going to maybe go out there and have the difficult conversation, or because maybe I got it wrong. And what we need to do, I think we're probably going to get onto this in the conversation around allyship. What we can do is how do we support people's confidence and organizational confidence to engage.
Absolutely, I agree.
I think it's that being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and accepting that we don't know it all, and that we need to work like with these groups. We need to work with women and support them and educate ourselves, and kind of in particular like around that male allyship. I think that's really important, because the onus is always on women to be responsible for our safety, but like it isn't always our responsibility. So I think it's, what does that meaningful allyship look like, I guess.
I think for me, it's usually not women that are making other women feel unsafe or be unsafe. So I think it's really important, like you say, the conversation doesn't just focus around women. It's actually, who else can we get involved? As you just described really well, you know, that thinking of like talking to each other, building that community, and being like, actually, what risks are you facing, or what is happening? What barriers are you facing, and how can we actually work together to break them down? Making sure that people are aware. I see so many like videos on Instagram or conversations with people where, you know, you'll talk to them about the worries that you have as a woman, or the experiences that you have, the risk assessments that you do, all the things that you plan for before you leave the house or even are inside the house. And often people don't actually realise that, or they don't know. So again, I really liked your point about like being inquisitive, like wanting to learn more, talking to people, because once people start to realise and actually listen to the groups of people who are marginalised, actually listen to them, take it seriously what they're saying, not just kind of dismiss what they're saying, I think that understanding is a good foundation. And then from there, it really is about, you know, then calling each other out and having those difficult conversations. You'll have things that, you know, oh, it's just a joke, it's not that serious, something that we hear all the time, you know, oh, it's just banter. I hate that word. But you know, something that we say at SARSAS is like, what you permit is what you promote. And we talk about that wider culture and how, you know, each kind of rung of the pyramid lays the base for the next one. So, you know, things like harmful, discriminatory jokes aren't just jokes. They enable other people to engage in harmful behaviour. They don't hold people to account when they are engaging in that harmful behaviour. And then people are able to carry on and to escalate, and other people can join in. So it's really important that we do nip things in the bud. We do hold people accountable. I think for me that's really important.
And I think celebrating successful interventions without having to like really feed into that, like, oh, well done, you challenged something, and kind of praising people for just like being good humans. It's obviously, you know what I mean, which can get quite tedious, I think. It's like, yeah, kudos. It's minimum. But I also think there is something about like we need to support people's confidence in doing it, right? I think there's something, you know, there's research around sort of 75% of people are uncomfortable with sexist jokes, but only 40% of people are intervening. And that gap is like not necessarily because people don't want to intervene, it's because they just sort of sat there feeling like, oh, I don't really know how to do this. And so there's something around how we work on the presumption that most people in the community want to stop the discrimination, the harm, you know, the hate, whatever. So, but most people are, for whatever reason, face barriers to doing that. So kind of working with allies to kind of support and increase confidence, and without, you know, as women always taking it on, it's not, you know, it's your responsibility, as well as it's your responsibility as well as some problem and your responsibility. It's that thing. It was our collective responsibility. But looking at how we can support people in the community to feel confident, giving tools, that kind of thing, and celebrating the collective work to intervene. I think that's really important.
Something that you said as well about responsibility, something that when I've looked up around like people being active bystanders, as you say, most people don't intervene. It is often that sense of responsibility, isn't it? People not feeling responsible and thinking, oh, maybe someone else will do it, or maybe I'm not the right person to do it. So I think, instilling that sense of responsibility into everyone is really important. Of like, we all have a responsibility to create safe environments and to create a safe community. We're all part of community. So I think making sure people feel that responsibility is a good step.
And what changes do you think are needed from council, schools, leisure providers, to kind of distribute that responsibility as such?
I think it needs to be embedded across everything. I think that sort of so say you're running a leisure centre or you're running a city, it's like, what values do you want to create your policies by? Where will you put your investment? How will you challenge? What business are you contracting? What's your intentions? And I think if your intention is to create safer spaces, to close equality gaps, then if you look at the decisions that you're making through that lens, I think you'll start to make better decisions. And so that will involve making sure people know what that looks like. So there's training. What does it mean to have safe spaces? How do we know? Safe for who? How have we thought about this? Like, have we put that? Are people aware of what we're talking about? Do people know what sexist microaggressions look like? Are they confident to challenge? So training. Then there's kind of maybe communicating that, as I said before, communicating your position. This is what we're doing to make this space safe. These are the changes that we've made. These is who we've talked about. If you have a problem, this is what you can do to come and talk to us about it, be it a city or a kind of a leisure centre or a business. And I think there's then having processes through which challenge can be made and taking action around that accountability action. So when people are being problematic, that they're held to account, and there's processes through which they have the opportunity to learn and develop, and or be excluded should they not wish to learn, develop, change their behaviour. And I think that then goes through kind of policies and procedures. And then I think there's kind of having review process and kind of making sure that this system is working. What can we do better? How is it working? Are people feeling safer? How are we making sure that more people are coming to the leisure centre? We've got greater diversity of take-up. People feel that they're coming for years because they really like our boxing and they feel safe here, or they like our running club, or whatever that might be. But I think ultimately, if you build it into, this is what we're about, and this is genuinely what we're about, then you will start to look through, is the money we're going to spend going to make people feel safer, as well as increase the numbers or whatever else? Is the training we're delivering supporting that? Is our HR structure inclusive? Have we got a diversity in the workforce, etc.? So I think it's multi-pronged, but I think it's really embedding those principles, so the kind of principles and values throughout your business, your organisation, your council.
I completely agree. And I think as well, it's something around thinking about, what are you kind of investing money in, and thinking about like maybe past campaigns that we've seen that might have been funded by public bodies that have really had like a victim blaming narrative. We've seen things like around like, if you're a woman, you shouldn't go out late at night kind of thing, or you shouldn't go out on your own. And although basic safety advice can be good for anybody of any gender, when we conflate that as being like the solution to harassment or gender-based violence, we are just victim blaming. So I think thinking about, what are we actually trying to intend here? Where are we putting our money? If we are going to do a campaign, what is the narrative that we're setting? are we trying to restrict women, or are we trying to say actually people shouldn't cause harm to other people? You know, if you see a woman exercising or a marginalised person exercising in a public space, you know, leave them be, don't harass them. This is what harassment looks like. You know, this is how you can be an active bystander if you see it, rather than just working on restricting people's lives who already have restricted lives anyway.
We need a big campaign. Stay home.
Exactly. But when you think about that, you know, thinking about previous campaigns, you know, thinking about, I don't know, for example, in the wake of Sarah Everard, women being told to stay home. Same with Peter Sutcliffe, who killed many women in Yorkshire, women being told to stay home. Yeah, if you heard that same narrative for men as an example, people would be like, that's ridiculous. But when you hear it directed at women, it's just like, okay, yeah, that seems sensible. Of course it's not, but that's how people take it.
How do you think we move from that, like, teaching women how to stay safe to this build a safer society narrative?
I think, again, it's that educational piece with our young men and boys as well. I think what's great within our gym, you can sort of, I don't want to use confront because it sounds a bit aggressive, but you can have those open conversations and challenge actually some of the views that we hear, that come through the gym, whether it be towards mum, whether it be towards siblings, whether it be towards friends or people that they go to the same school with. Why do you think that? Where have you heard that from? Then thinking about, what are you listening to? Is that the right thing that you should be watching, that you see it online? And sort of forming that, getting our young men and boys to form that sort of opinion of, is that the right thing to do? Would you like it if somebody spoke about your mum like that, or spoke to your mum like that? And yeah, would you like it if that was done to you, sort of thing? So I think, yeah, again, not just teaching women how to be safe themselves, but to our young men and boys, how their actions or their feelings or their words make someone else feel, and the way that they conduct themselves. So looking at the way that they conduct themselves in public and openly as well around different groups.
Perfect. To your point around kind of shining a light on what harassment is, I think loads of people don't know. And I think loads of women don't know when they've experienced sexual harassment, but loads of boys maybe don't, men don't necessarily know that the behaviours that they're doing are harassment. And I think there is, again, working on the presumption that most people want, well, equality for everywhere all the time. Let's assume best case scenario, that's what we're working towards, what everybody's committed to working towards. But most people want to be part of a solution. I think there's that, you know, like you're saying, kind of talking to people about, are you aware of how that behaviour is perceived? Are you aware maybe what the impact that's having? I think in a lot of percentage of times that people might then reflect and be like, oh, actually, hang on, I don't really want to be part of the problem. I'd rather be part of the solution. You are going to have people that don't care and are going to carry on. But I think it's sort of having that conversation, but also putting it on the agenda again, making sure that people, whether it's at the school gates, whether it's you know, wherever, are equipped to recognise what we're talking about. I think people don't necessarily know because it's so like, this is how it is. This is not how it has to be. But I really do think most people aren't necessarily equipped to identify what we're talking about, and therefore identify that these small actions kind of thread right through to the bigger oppressive system, that we can point to that and say, that's bad. But here it's like, well, you know, this is tiny, and we've got bigger things like domestic violence to contend with. It's like, well, no, this is important, and are you recognising that this is part of the spectrum that condones this?
I think engaging, like, it's great that I'm an ally and I'm able to have these open conversations, but how do we get to the ones that are not, or don't see themselves as allies, or see it as almost like they're not doing anything wrong? Because I think with me and some of my friends and stuff like that, almost like not preaching to the converted, but in that sort of essence, how do we get to the ones who maybe are stuck in their ways and just have that open dialogue with them? So what is it about women's safety, or what is it, why do you think women are safe all the time, or what are your views on that? And so having that open conversation to hopefully change their mind.
people think, don't they, if they're not actively harming, then they must be, they must be helping, they must be doing good. They say it's not always necessarily about that. It's like, actually, are you having conversations with your friend? Are you, listening to people, trying to learn more, like you were saying earlier? It's not just about not actively harming people, but I think there's also an education point there around what does an ally actually mean? Like, how do you actually be an ally? I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to help, but maybe don't know how to, or think, again, that just because they're not actively harming people, they are being an ally. So maybe we do need more kind of conversations and more education around this is how you can actually help.
And I think positively framed ones as well. I think there probably is the thing around young men feeling kind of quite under attack by all the information and the kind of the rightly held conversation around how much women and girls are impacted by these things. But also I think it's really important that we avoid the dynamic that then makes all men and boys bad. And that kind of comes back to the point around sort of supporting and celebrating and, we as a community are stamping this out, rather than women need to be taught this, men need to be taught that. Is how we good humaning.
Yeah, and I think with this topic in particular as well, like sometimes it's quite generational. Like I've had so many conversations growing up where it's like, even with my dad being like, well, what were you wearing? And like, you need to like do this and you need to do that. And actually, like, we need to be able to have those conversations where it's just like, I can wear whatever I want. I can go out whenever I want. Like when spiking was a really big issue in Bristol a few years ago, my dad's like, don't go out. And I'm like, well, but I want to go out. I want to have fun. I have every right to go out and feel safe. And I think it's sometimes difficult to have that conversation, but also really important. But to end on a positive note, where are we seeing progress at the moment?
So I think there is more conversations around harm in sport. Like, just to take an example, I used to be a gymnast and came out about 5-6 years ago now. Some quite big names in gymnastics came forward to name the abuse that they had experienced, physical, sexual, emotional abuse in the sport. And since then, I've seen, particularly in gymnastics, a bit of a shift towards, okay, like naming it. Again, I've seen like British gymnastics posts where they've said like, actually, this is what emotional abuse looks like if your coach is doing this to you. That's not okay. This is what a safe environment should feel like in the sport. So I think we're having more conversations around what harm is, putting more safeguards into place. We've definitely got a long way to go, particularly for women and girls and their safety. But I think we are moving in the right direction, opening up those conversations.
Yeah, I think I would say like the first step always when sort of when tackling a problem is recognizing that there is a problem. I think conversations like this are happening more and more into spaces. I think success in women's sports, particularly for our England and Great Britain teams as well, across the board in Winter Olympics and stuff like that. And I think that is opening up a lot of people's eyes to women's sport and how powerful women's sports can be. So a lot of our young women and girls are getting involved more into football, boxing and different types of sport that they would almost be excluded from or not taken as seriously before. So we are making strides, but again, as you say, we've got a long way to go. But yeah, we are. Seeing the gym, at the boxing gym on an evening when a whole heap of mixed people from different backgrounds, cultures and stuff like that, it really sort of inspires me to do more and have conversations like this more and more.
And I think at a policy level as well, it is feeding through. If you look at Bristol City Council and kind of the work that's being done to regenerate Castle Park, and there's another park as well that's also up for redesign. And I know a lot of safety conversations have fed through into that, and there's been motions in the full council around making sure that parks are safe for girls, which includes looking at lighting. There's often conversations around, wildlife being damaged by lights, but then safety being improved by lights and that kind of conversation, but how some of those are getting maybe finding a compromise with that in terms of motion sensitive lights, but also just paying attention to setting up space that would be good for exercise, for running and so on, how to make them safer. So lights, clearing so there's no kind of dark corners or sort of long views, not high hedges, those sorts of things. And I think at a national level, it's quite positive that the the government has introduced the requirement to teach about misogyny as part of PSHE. I think the next step is making sure that those required to teach about misogyny have an understanding of actually what that is. And so again, but it's baby steps and lots of these things, and you've got to. There is also the context that this is forever old, and the steps that are being taken are small, but they are being taken. And I think very much to the points made earlier around it being a conversation that feels a lot more live, is really positive.
Cool. And what does a safer Bristol look like in 5 years? Ideal world. Perfect. Figured it all out.
Visiting 5 years.
Yeah, I think more investment. I think the government needs to put their money where their mouth is. There's a lot of talk around wanting to halve violence against women and girls and wanting to create safe spaces. We need to see action that actually aligns with that money invested into those correct places to actually achieve that. I would love to see a Bristol in a world where, again, girls can, there's not all these rules and regulations and judgments and expectations of them, that they can just engage in their sports that they want to engage in without having to feel that fear and feel that pressure to conform or look a certain way or wear certain clothing, that there's not all of these kind of rules around it, that they can just be safe. That is what I would love to see, hopefully.
I would say more women and girls taking up our sports and being involved in more successes of our young women from Bristol going on making national headlines by doing well in their sports, in their fields, and hopefully a women's world champion boxer. TMA Aiton's coming up at the moment. She's 5-0, I believe. So hopefully she'll go on and continue carrying that flag for women and girls across Bristol.
Did you say she was 5?
No, 5-0.
Oh, right.
1-5. World champion at 10.
Great. I think, freedom of movement and freedom of movement, freedom to engage, freedom to be heard, freedom to speak up, freedom to get involved, across all groups of women, girls and others, I think that's what safety looks like.
Cool. Well, thank you all for your time and a really enjoyable and important conversation on women's safety.
Thank you.
Already did we? I also was going to have the biggest sneeze when you were speaking then. I was like, don't sneeze.